Chapter 101. It's time for the meeting. In Muggle novels and movies, dragon riders always look so imposing and powerful, Ciaran said with a smile, clearly imagining riders astride real dragons. Ha ha, Kingsley laughed. Dragons have terrible tempers. Even someone like Dumbledore would struggle to control one unless it had been raised from a hatchling and truly accepted its rider. Mr. Weasley sighed. Ciaran, that's not practical. Charlie writes that raising dragons is dangerous. All right, it was just a joke. Ciaran shrugged and smiled. They were gathered in a dim room with rough stone walls. Most of the light came from a large fireplace at the far end. Smoke from the pipes hung in the air like gunpowder on a battlefield. Heavy iron pots and basins swung from the dark rafters, their silhouettes made more menacing by the smoke. Since the meeting was about to start, extra chairs filled the room, and a long wooden table sat at the center. Parchments, goblets, beer bottles, and plates of Molly's pastries Sirius had arranged for them covered the table. Sirius dropped into a chair and grinned wryly. Not bad, eh? It's fine. After all these years empty, it's still habitable. Ciaran meant it. The black ancestral home was gloomy and eerie, but it was a home. Sirius went on. When I was still wanted by the Ministry and hadn't cleared my name, I couldn't come back here. He paused. To be honest, I didn't want to. If Dumbledore hadn't needed a private, out-of-the-way headquarters for the Order, other places are too conspicuous. People are always coming and going. Ministry officials could show up. This was the best option. Hagrid, your performance in Nocturne Alley was brilliant, Mundungus Fletcher said, hair as messy as ever, laughing. Hagrid belted out a laugh and took a huge pull from a goblet that was noticeably larger than everyone else's. I know dung. Every one of those merchants in Nocturne Alley, he boomed. Then, from the entrance hall, a far louder, shrill voice erupted. Beast, whore, filthy and evil spawn, bastard, freak, ugly monster, get out of here! How dare you defile my ancestors' home? Hagrid went silent and muttered apologies. Sirius was already on his feet and sprinted for the hall, followed by Ciaran, Lupin, and Tonks. The entrance hall's wallpaper peeled in strips, the once luxurious carpet had faded to something threadbare and old, and a cobwebbed chandelier swung dimly, making the portraits on the walls look even more sinister. To one side, two moth-eaten velvet curtains had been pulled aside. Behind them, not a door or window, but a hanging portrait. Inside the painting, a window was painted, and an old woman in a black family hat was shouting with a twisted, contorted face. Shut up, you horrible old hag! Sirius stormed forward and hauled the curtains shut. The old woman's painted face went chalk white. Spawn, she shrieked, eyes bulging. Spendthrift, a disgrace to the family, the abomination I gave birth to. I said, shut up, Sirius roared. Ciaran and Lupin grabbed the curtains to help. At last, the woman's screams faded into muffled mutters. Tonks, a little sheepish, said, What a pity. I wanted to help. Oh, sorry. She backed into a troll leg that had been propped against the wall, sending it crashing. Ciaran felt a sudden, powerful tug from behind the curtains, as if something in the portrait tried to force its way back into the room. Hold it, Ciaran ordered, clutching the curtain. Lupin, go steady, Tonks. Sirius sounded irritated. Tonks, sit down inside, please. I knocked it over. I'll put it back. Tonks refused to be shushed, and with Lupin's help, they wrestled the heavy troll leg back into place. At that moment, the main door opened. Dumbledore and Snape stepped in, one after the other. Snape shut the door and saw Sirius's actions. A mocking curl touched his lips. Ah, so industrious, our hero Black, keeping his own mother tightly contained behind the curtains. Shut up, Snivelus, Sirius ground out. Snape smirked but held his tongue with Dumbledore present. Molly bustled up the entrance hall and called, Albus, would you like something to eat? The rest of us have something to stave off hunger. No, Molly. Dumbledore bowed slightly as he made his way through. Severus and I had a bite before coming. A glass of beer would be delightful, though. Molly hurried off and returned with 2 foaming pints, which she set in front of Dumbledore and Snape. Everyone took their places. Dumbledore looked around and smiled gently. It is good to see you all. Though many of our companions cannot be here, I'm sure their thoughts are with us. Enough of the pleasantries, Albus. Let's begin, Moody urged, his magical eye whirring and rotating. Ciaran smiled inwardly. As the Order's second-in-command, Moody wasted nothing. His eyes swung toward Ciaran for a moment. He spread his hands and the odd gaze moved on. "Forgive me, Alastair," Dumbledore said with the smallest of smiles, then grew solemn. "Lord Voldemort's return is now beyond doubt." A sudden clatter announced the arrival of a house elf. Wrapped only in a dirty scrap of cloth around his waist, he was otherwise almost naked. He looked ancient. His skin hung in folds, his head bald except for a stubborn tuft of white hair over bat-like ears, and his bloodshot, watery eyes stared hazily. His fleshy nose was nearly porcine. He seemed oblivious to the roomful of wizards and witches, and shuffled, hunchbacked, toward a corner, muttering in a croaking whisper like a bullfrog. Ciaran's eyes flickered. This was Creature, the Black family house elf, and he was tied to an important source of force points for Ciaran. 102. Creature was muttering as Ciaran examined him. "It smells of gutters and criminals. He's no better, that hateful prodigal son, bringing his lackeys to defile my mistress's rooms. Oh, my poor mistress, if she could see what filth they hauled into her house, what would she say to old Creature? What a disgrace. Purebloods, half-breeds, werewolves, giants, liars, thieves. Poor old Creature, what can he do?" "Out, Creature," Sirius said harshly, pointing to the door. The house elf froze, the muttering cutting off. He adopted an exaggerated, suspiciously surprised look. Ciaran noticed the Slytherin locket clutched in Creature's hand, the locket Regulus had given him, and knew it must be important. Creature did not see the filthy, dirty master just now, Creature said, bowing his head toward Sirius, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The young master is a hateful, ungrateful wretch who broke his mother's heart." Snape gave a derisive snort. "My mother has no heart," Sirius snapped impatiently. "She lives only on hatred. Creature, I told you. Out!" "Sirius, try to be kinder to Creature," Dumbledore said gently. "A hateful old wretch," Creature replied, bowing again as he shambled toward the door, answering Sirius with a string of insults. "No matter what the young master says, he isn't fit to wipe his mother's shoes. Oh, my poor mistress, to see Creature serving the young master, how she would despise him. He broke the mistress's heart. So shameful." Sirius looked as if he wanted to seize the elf and throw him out, but Dumbledore's quiet admonition held him back. As Creature reached the threshold, Ciaran stroked his chin and seized the moment. "Sirius, order Creature to stay inside," he said. Sirius frowned but obeyed. He was Creature's master. Creature had to obey. "Creature, stay." The elf stopped immediately, motionless. "Ciaran, what is this?" Mr. Weasley asked, puzzled. "I don't think house elves are supposed to take part in this meeting." Several others nodded in agreement. Dumbledore, who trusted Ciaran enough to know he would not speak without reason, asked, "Ciaran, have you discovered something?" Ciaran inclined his head slightly. "There are discoveries, yes, but I can't be certain without Creature's answers." He lied. He was already convinced of the truth, but no one could verify his supposed investigation on the spot. Eyes turned toward him, full of curiosity and doubt. "The diary incident last year, Professor Dumbledore, Professor Snape, Professor McGonagall, Hagrid, do you remember?" he asked. McGonagall nodded. "Riddle's diary, one of you-know-whose Horcruxes from his youth." "A Horcrux?" For several in the room, Kingsley Sirius, the diary's full nature was news, and they gasped. Those who didn't know what a Horcrux was, Mundungus, Mrs. Figg, Tonks, leaned forward as Lupin quietly explained the concept, their faces blanching as they learned it required the murder of another to create. Creature had been about to spit more insults, but when the words Horcrux and you-know-who reached him, he froze and stared at Ciaran. "Lord Voldemort made Horcruxes. That's why he's still alive. He didn't die in Godric's Hollow 12 years ago?" Moody's hand tightened on his cane, his magical eye whirred. Dumbledore simply nodded. Sirius frowned. "What does Voldemort's Horcrux have to do with Creature?" "It's not only about Creature," Ciaran said softly. "It's also deeply connected to Regulus." Sirius's expression changed as though he'd misunderstood. "Are you saying Regulus helped Voldemort make a Horcrux and Voldemort silenced him?" he blurted. Ciaran gave a dry smile. "What are you thinking? Do you distrust Regulus so much to believe he was that kind of dark wizard who kills innocents?" Sirius opened his mouth, thinking of Regulus's past devotion to Voldemort, but could not say it aloud. "According to information I gathered through investigation and discreet inquiries, Regulus was a true hero," Ciaran added, a convenient lie. No one could immediately check his sources, and the claim shifted the room's attention back toward Creature. Sirius went pale. Ciaran spread his hands, then looked at the house elf. I don't know all the details, but I believe Creature knows the truth. Creature continued to stare blankly. Creature, I order you to tell us everything about Regulus, Sirius demanded. The elf began to tremble, body shaking uncontrollably. Creature, Sirius barked, I order you. The elf gasped, his shriveled chest heaving. Then, widening his bulging eyes, he let out a raw, keening cry. Young Master Regulus, Young Master Regulus, Creature made a mistake. Creature failed the young master's order. Creature did not carry out young Master Regulus's command. With the last words, Creature lurched toward the stone wall and began banging his misshapen head against it. No, Professor McGonagall, Mrs. Weasley, Mrs. Fig, and Tonks cried out. Ciaran and Arthur Weasley lunged forward and forced the elf down, holding him to keep him from hurting himself further. The room dissolved into frantic noise. Sirius, Dumbledore's voice cut through the chaos. Sirius roared, Stop! Creature! I order you to stop! At that, Ciaran felt the elf go rigid beneath their hands. Only then did he and Arthur release him. 103. The Story of Creature and Regulus. All right, tell us, Creature. Tell us your story with Regulus. Seeing that the house elf had stopped hurting himself, Ciaran rose and sat back in a nearby chair. Creature gasped several times, pushed himself up from the floor, curled into a ball, buried his wet face between his knees, and began to rock. His voice was low and muffled, but carried clearly through the quiet kitchen. Young Master Sirius ran away, and it was good he left, for he was a bad boy. His wicked ways broke my mistress's heart. But young Master Regulus had pride. He knew what the black name and noble blood meant. Severus Snape offered a small, mocking smile, but did not interrupt. Creature went on. For many years he often spoke of the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord would make wizards stop hiding and come out to rule muggles and muggle-borns. When young Master Regulus was 16, he joined the Dark Lord's followers. He was so proud, so arrogant, so happy to serve. 1 year later, one day, young Master Regulus came to the kitchen to see Creature. Young Master Regulus always liked Creature. Young Master Regulus said, the house elf's rocking and trembling grew worse. He said the Dark Lord wanted a house elf. A house elf? The others exchanged looks. The Dark Lord wanted a house elf? The thought made more than a few of them uneasy. He despised other beings. Why would he want a house elf? Moody's magical eye fixed on Creature. What did he want the house elf for? Sirius frowned, looking to the others. Most were as baffled as he was, save for Dumbledore and Ciaran. Ciaran said quietly, Creature, please continue. Oh, yes. Creature seemed distraught. Young Master Regulus offered Creature. An honor, young Master Regulus said, an honor for himself and for Creature. Creature must do whatever the Dark Lord required, and then return home. He rocked faster. His breathing turned into sobs. If not for Sirius's command forbidding further self-harm, Creature would have begun bashing his head against the stone again. So Creature went to the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord did not tell Creature what to do, but took Creature to a cave by the sea, a great stone cave, and inside there was a great black lake. There was a boat. In the middle of the lake was a small island, and on the island a stone basin, full of a potion. The Dark Lord made Creature drink. Creature shook all over. Creature drank. When he drank, he saw terrible things. Creature's insides were on fire. Creature cried for young Master Regulus to save him, called for his mistress, but the Dark Lord only laughed. He forced Creature to drink all the potion. He threw a locket into the empty basin and then refilled it with potion. Ciaran's eyes gleamed. That locket was his target. Judging from what they'd already found in Ravenclaw's diadem and Gryffindor's sword, Slytherin's locket must also contain a considerable amount of force points. Then the Dark Lord boarded the boat and left, leaving Creature on the island. The house elf choked out. Everyone pictured it. In the dim cave, the pale, snake-like face of the Dark Lord receding at the entrance, while his cruel, triumphant laugh echoed, leaving a wounded Creature writhing on a lonely island. That Creature should have been trapped. Lord Voldemort would hardly have left anything so important unguarded. How could a house elf resist his magic? Creature was in dreadful pain and very frightened, but Creature was too thirsty. He crawled to the shores of the little island to drink from the black lake. Many hands rose from the water, dead people's hands, reaching up and dragging Creature down. "Oh my!" Professor McGonagall, Mrs. Weasley, Mrs. Fig and Tonks all covered their mouths, tears welling. The men present were equally grave. A lake full of hands. Were those the bodies of the Dark Lord's victims? Even knowing how depraved the Dark Lord was, the image of the drowned or murdered rising from that water made their blood run cold and their chests burn with anger. "Severus, do you know anything about the potion in that stone basin?" Dumbledore asked. Snape answered slowly, "I have my theories, but not enough to be certain. I would need to see it to identify it properly." "Creature, how did you escape?" Lupin asked. Creature glared at him with clear revulsion. "Oh my!" The filthy werewolf spoke to Creature. "Creature will not allow it. What would my mistress say if she knew?" "I forbid you to use the word werewolf again," Sirius barked, but Creature had already begun to punish himself. He flung himself to the floor and smashed his head against the stone, the thuds echoing through the kitchen. "Stop him, Sirius," Lupin blurted. Ciaran moved quickly and held the house elf down, while Sirius roared, "Stop it! I command you to stop!" Creature lay still, a swollen lump rising on his forehead, his eyes raw and tear-filled. "How did you escape, Creature?" Dumbledore asked gently. Creature raised his ugly head, bloodshot eyes fixed on Dumbledore. Young Master Regulus told Creature to go home. Dumbledore's face shifted from frown to sudden understanding. "I know that, but how did you get out of the lake?" Sirius persisted, baffled. Creature repeated, as if he had not understood the question at all. Young Master Regulus told Creature to go home. "I know, but—" Sirius began again. Then Ciaran cut him off. "It's simple," Ciaran said. "He left that cave by apparition." "But wouldn't the Dark Lord have guarded against that? How could he allow a house elf to carry his secret away?" Lupin asked. Ciaran answered, "House elf magic is different from wizard magic, isn't it? We can't apparate within Hogwarts because of the wards, but house elves don't seem to be bound by the same protections." A heavy silence fell. The kitchen sat in a kind of deathly stillness, broken only by Creature's continued sobbing. "Would you know who makes such a basic mistake?" Mr. Weasley whispered, sounding a little bewildered. Dumbledore's voice went cold. "You must understand, as Alastor has said, Lord Voldemort never truly valued other lives. He scorns the magic of house elves the way some pureblood families treat them as nothing more than servants or livestock. He would never have imagined that house elves can use magic he does not command. This is the price of our arrogance. The highest law for a house elf is the Master's command," Creature intoned like a chant. "Master told Creature to go home, so Creature went home." Silence fell. Everyone stared at the elf, stunned into speechlessness. Ciaran whispered, "Lord Voldemort paid for his arrogance." "So you obeyed Regulus's command?" Dumbledore asked gently. "You didn't disobey him?" Creature nodded, then shook his head all at once. Sirius pushed forward with urgent questions. "What happened after you returned? Did you tell Regulus? What did he say? How did he die?" Creature's voice broke as he spoke. When Creature told young Master Regulus was very worried. Very, very, very worried. He told Creature to hide and not to leave the house. Then, after a long time, one night young Master Regulus came to the cupboard for Creature. He was not like himself. His heart was in turmoil. He told Creature to take him to the cave, the same cave the Dark Lord and Creature had been to. They could picture it clearly, the terrified ancient elf and the gaunt young man who looked so much like Sirius. Creature knew the way. He knew how to cross the Black Lake, how to reach the tiny island. "Did he make you drink the potion?" Mr. Weasley asked, voice thick. Creature immediately shook his head and began to sob. Tears welled in Dumbledore's eyes. The headmaster had already guessed Regulus's choice. Ciaran's sigh was full of feeling. Young Master Regulus took from his pocket another locket, exactly like the Dark Lord's, Creature said haltingly, tears running down his long nose. He put it in Creature's hand and told Creature, when the basin was empty, to swap the lockets. Creature's sobs grew harsher. Everyone had to lean in to follow him. He ordered Creature to leave, to mind his own business. He told Creature to go home and not tell the mistress what had happened. No, young Master forbade Creature from telling anyone in the family what happened in the cave. but he said the first locket must be destroyed. Then he drank. He drank the potion dry. Creature swapped the locket. Creature could only watch. Watch young Master Regulus being dragged under the water. Oh my goodness! Professor McGonagall and Mrs. Weasley covered their mouths. Tears shone in their eyes. Sirius slumped into a chair, deathly pale, his body trembling. Dumbledore's voice was soft when he asked, "And the locket, did you manage to destroy it?" Creature looked down mournfully. Creature could not leave a mark on it. Creature tried everything, every method, but not one would work. The box is full of powerful magic. Creature believes it can only be destroyed from the inside, but Creature could not open it. He punished himself and tried again. Creature continued through his sobs, and punished himself and tried again. Still Creature failed to carry out young Master Regulus's command. The mistress went mad with grief when young Master Regulus disappeared, and Creature could not tell her what had happened. No, because young Master had forbidden it. The strain in the room made several people cry. Professor McGonagall, Mrs. Weasley, Mrs. Fig, Tonks, even Hagrid, who let out deep, choking sobs. Many of the men looked uncomfortable, their faces drawn. "Then, Creature, could you fetch that locket for us to see?" Ciaran asked softly. Creature swayed as he stood, on the verge of collapse. Ciaran moved before anyone could object. "You hid the locket under the cupboard, didn't you? I'll get it." He went to Creature's cupboard, wand alight in one hand, and opened the door. Inside were a heap of worn blankets, Creature's bed, an old genealogy book titled Born Noble, A Wizard's Genealogy, a few glittering trinkets, and in the corner, half buried in dust, the golden locket, Slytherin's locket. It gleamed spitefully even under the dust. Joy flared in Ciaran's chest as he took the locket. At once his system panel pinged. Slytherin's locket found, force points, 40 points. Absorb, absorb, Ciaran thought. He had come for the locket in part for this exact chance, to take the force points contained within. A cool sensation spread through him as the points flowed in. On his panel, the numbers leapt. He'd already absorbed 40 force points from the Gryffindor sword earlier and had deliberately saved them. The new addition raised his total. Force points, 80 points. Ciaran suppressed the urge to immediately raise his magic level and return to the meeting with the locket in hand. "Slytherin's locket," he said, setting it on the table. "I think this is one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes. He wouldn't have preserved it like this otherwise. So many innocent people must have died in that cave because of it." Dumbledore took the locket and examined it closely, interest sharpening his features. Sirius suddenly rose to his feet, still pale, but with a resolve that hardened his voice. "I'm going to that cave to bring Regulus back." "I'm bringing Regulus back," Sirius said, voice flat with resolve. His face was set. "I won't let him lie in that dark, sunless place forever, his bones consumed by the dark arts." Dumbledore put the locket down and nodded. "You're right, Sirius. We cannot leave the remains of a hero in such a place, nor those of the other innocents. They must be properly buried." Sirius met the headmaster's gaze and, solemn, added, "Creature, take us to the cave." "Let us come too," said Lupin, rubbing his forehead. "Burying so many innocent people who died so sadly will not be easy." Mr. Weasley frowned. "The house is heavily warded. That elf probably can't apparate us all at once." Ciaran suggested, "Send 2 people with Creature first. If they find the entrance, we can come back for the others." "All right," Dumbledore decided. "Alastor, will you go?" Moody's magical eye whirled in its socket. "A fine idea. I'll go." Sirius stepped forward and seized one of Creature's hands. Dumbledore and Moody took the elf's other hand. There was a sharp crack of magic. Pop! And the 3 of them vanished, apparating from within the black house despite its protections. Professor McGonagall exhaled, tears lifting to her eyes. "I once taught that boy in Transfiguration. I never expected." She could say no more. Lupin said quietly, "He was a true hero. Even after joining the Death Eaters, he turned when it mattered and tried to fight you-know-who." Regulus Black was Sirius's younger brother. Sirius spoke with the knowledge and pain of someone who had loved him. Ciaran, remembering the tale he had read, murmured, "The Slytherin locket, a Horcrux of Lord Voldemort. I think Regulus was the first person, apart from Voldemort himself, to learn that secret." There was sudden activity, more sharp pops, and one by one, the others returned to the house. "Let's move outside." The wards in here will impede our magic, Dumbledore advised, and they filed through the corridor and out the front door. A number of people remained behind to wait: Mrs. Fig, Mundungus, Hagrid, Snape, Kingsley, while the rest prepared to go. Creature looked drawn and pale. Apparition drains an elf's power as well as a wizard's. Ciaran knelt and asked, worried, "Are you all right, Creature?" The elf squeaked. "Creature has enough, sir. Creature will take you. You must bring back young Master Regulus's bones." "We will," Lupin answered, voice steady. With one last pop, Creature apparated, this time taking Ciaran and Lupin with him. They arrived standing on a tall black outcrop above the sea. The wind smelled of salt, and the setting sun slanted a red light across the water. The cold bit at their faces. Waves exploded and foamed at the rocks below. Behind them yawned a sheer cliff, rough and jagged, with several sharp-faced rocks like the one beneath their feet, detached fragments of the cliff from some ancient fall. The place was utterly barren. No trees, no grass, only rock and sea as far as the eye could see. In the red glow, Ciaran noticed a fissure in the cliff, a dark seam filled with churning water, and a figure with wind-tousled black hair swimming through it. Sirius. More pops! Dumbledore and Moody arrived with others, and the outcrop filled with people. "We need a boat," Mr. Weasley said, glancing at the boiling water. "There isn't one. These waters are dangerous." Dumbledore surprised them all with his quickness. He slid from the shingle into the surf as lightly as any young man, held his wand between his teeth, and began a steady breaststroke toward the fissure, strong, controlled, utterly composed. Ciaran, biting down on nerves and cold, followed, as did the rest. November seawater was mercilessly cold. Their clothes soaked and weighed them down. The stinging salt smell and the pull of the water were discouraging, but they were all hardened wizards. They would not turn back because of cold. The fissure opened into a dim passage as they swam inward. Sirius had pushed ahead. He stood in the shallow current, wand held aloft to cast light. Behind him, Dumbledore, Moody, Lupin, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, McGonagall, Tonks, Creature, and the others emerged in succession. Ciaran was last, water streaming from his clothes as he hauled himself up the slick stone steps. Narrow walls hemmed them in, no more than 3 feet apart in places, and the farther in they went, the lower the light glowed. They stood in a gloomy rock chamber that looked as if it had been carved by long-ago sea and stone. Their dripping clothing clung to them, and a cold silence pressed in so hard even the women shivered and went pale. Dumbledore raised his wand, summoned dry wood, and lit a fire. The warmth and light pushed back the chill and revealed the cave walls. Bare, rough, unforgiving rock. Whatever island and inland lake legends had suggested, here it became clear that the supposed isle and lake had been no natural haven at all, but part of the cave's cruel geography. Not the welcoming place Creature had described, but the harsh, black heart of the cliff. 106. Low-level conditions. Ciaran and the others touched their wands to their soaked clothes. The wet fabric immediately dried and warmed, as if they had been sitting by a fire for hours. The cave itself remained cold. The sea swim had left a chill in their bones. Their hands and feet were still numb, so they clustered together and warmed themselves by a small fire. Dumbledore and Sirius stood nearer the center of the cave, wands raised, studying the rock face and ceiling carefully. Sirius paced nervously. "Why is there no entrance?" "This is the place," Dumbledore said. "You found the entrance, Dumbledore?" Sirius asked quickly. "How do you know, Dumbledore? You've never been here before," Tonks added, perplexed. "It has been enchanted," Dumbledore replied briefly. Tonks looked baffled, as if she hadn't understood the meaning behind his words. Ciaran knew more about this place than he'd let on. Though Dumbledore had never physically visited it before, he clearly understood the layers of protection Voldemort had set around the hiding place of his Horcrux, far more elaborate than the careless concealment of Riddle's diary. "This is only the antechamber," Dumbledore said after a moment. "We need to get inside. What's blocking us now is a mechanism set by Voldemort, not a natural obstruction." Dumbledore stepped forward and ran his empty left hand over the cave wall, murmuring an incantation in a strange language none of them recognized. They might not have understood the words, but they all knew the old wizard was probing Voldemort's spells, so they waited, keeping warm by the fire. With Creature unable to apparate, Dumbledore had to uncover the protections step by step. Voldemort's magic here was subtle, deep, and they were still a step behind. Dumbledore paced twice around the right side of the cave, keeping his hand on the rough stone as he moved, sometimes pausing to rub his fingers along a particular place. At last he stopped, flattened his palm against the rock, and said softly, "Here, I'm certain. The entrance is very well hidden." No one questioned him. Dumbledore had the reputation and the power to justify such certainty. Even if Ciaran suspected a door lay somewhere in the cave, finding it himself would have taken hours. Dumbledore saw it in minutes. He stepped back a pace, raised his wand, and pointed. Whoosh! An outline of an arch appeared in the rock, emitting a blinding white light, as if someone had shone bright lamps from a crack. It worked! Several voices brightened at once, but before anyone could say more, the archway's outline vanished and the rock returned to its unbroken hardness. What they had seen was gone. Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, "Why did it disappear?" Ciaran already suspected the conditions for opening the door. He simply hadn't known its exact location. Now that Dumbledore had found it, half the problem was solved. He stepped forward and said quietly, "Dumbledore, I think you've already guessed, but perhaps you find Voldemort's conditions too simple." "Do you have a guess, Ciaran?" Dumbledore asked. "I can't be certain. We'll have to try," Dumbledore replied, then added softly, "I still think it's too simple." Tonks looked even more confused. The others, except Moody, exchanged puzzled glances. Ciaran approached the wall and smiled faintly. Voldemort wouldn't want anyone wandering in on him. He hid a Horcrux here, now under Regulus's care, and he would have left an entrance for his own entry and exit. To keep others out, he would require a price to be paid. "A price?" Sirius asked. "What sort of price? What must we do?" "If I'm right," Ciaran said casually, "the price is blood." There was a brief silence. Dumbledore did not hide his disappointment. "Blood?" he said. "That's disappointingly simple. Voldemort's idea of weakening others to gain access is predictable. Offering fresh blood as a key is crude. He failed to appreciate that there are things far more terrifying than physical injury." The rest exchanged glances. Many of them thought physical harm was frightening enough. Before anyone else could move, Sirius stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said. One reason they had come was to bury his younger brother Regulus. He wanted to honor him, and if blood was required, he volunteered. Without hesitation, Sirius drew his wand across his arm and blood welled. "All right, Sirius, if you insist," Dumbledore said, stepping aside. He had intended to offer his own blood, but Sirius had already gone first. Ciaran also moved back. Sirius pressed the wound to the rock, letting dark red droplets bead and smear across a corner of the stone. "That's enough," Ciaran said, tapping Sirius's injured arm with his wand. "Heal it as before." The wound closed at once under a healing spell. The dazzling outline returned, and this time it did not vanish. The blood-splattered stone inside the archway crumbled away like dust, revealing an opening yawning into blackness. A passage that seemed to lead into the depths of the earth itself. "Come with me," Dumbledore said, and stepped first through the archway. Sirius, anxious and fidgeting, went in second. Ciaran followed third, and the others, Creature included, crowded behind. Moody had snuffed the bonfire outside as they left. Once inside, everyone raised their wands. Under incendio, several bright flames cut into the cavern's gloom. There had been almost no light here before. Their wands were like lamps in their hands, casting the only illumination. Ciaran looked around with interest. The scene was strange and otherworldly. They stood on the shore of a vast black lake whose surface seemed to stretch forever, as if they were on an open plain rather than in a cave. The opposite bank could not be seen. The cave lofted so high that no ceiling was discernible. Even with the darkness swallowing the roof, Ciaran guessed it was at least 80 to 100 meters up. Far out on the water, a hazy emerald light flickered and was reflected in the still, dead surface. Apart from that green glow and the points of wand light, everything was swallowed by an impenetrable dark that felt denser and heavier than ordinary night. Creature began to sob in a low, broken voice. "Master Regulus! Master Regulus!" He was dragged down to the bottom of the lake by countless hands. Sirius, reckless with grief, lurched toward the water as if he would fling himself in. He thought he could swim to the bottom and fetch his brother. "Sirius, calm down," Don't be foolish, Ciaran warned, stepping in front of him. He knew Voldemort had set protections in this cave. The lake's bottom was not a peaceful place. You want to stop me, Ciaran? Sirius snapped. Ciaran's tone stayed level. I don't want to see you die for nothing. There are countless inferi in that water. He paused, then added, but if you insist. Sirius, you must calm down. We came to retrieve the remains, not to throw ourselves away, Lupin said quietly. Sirius lifted his wand and pointed at the lake. Then I'll burn this great lake first. Incendio. A jet of fire erupted from his wand, and the instant it hit the surface, something huge leapt up out of the water, a pale white shape that vanished again with a splash before anyone could see it clearly, sending ripples across the black surface. Everyone flinched. At the same moment, Sirius's flame guttered out. What was that? Mr. Weasley asked, his face going pale. Dumbledore's voice was soft. I think that thing will appear again to interfere with us, indeed to attack us, unless we can break whatever is binding it. Then what do we do? Tonks asked, having taken a couple of cautious steps back. Now she peered into the dark water. Observe first. Don't act rashly, Dumbledore replied. They spread along the stony shoreline, footsteps echoing on the narrow ledge. The green light flickered in the lake's center, oppressive and unnerving. Moody patrolled with his magical eye spinning, fixed on the water. His face was grim, a mixture of anger and sorrow. Alastor, have you found anything? Mr. Weasley asked. Very, very many corpses, Moody said, his voice low as he struck his walking stick against the rock. I can't even count them. That Tom, how many did he kill here? His magical eye, unblinking, had looked through the water and the dark, seeing what others could not. Several of them made small noises of horror. They had come prepared for the grisly work, to retrieve Regulus Black's bones, but Moody's words kindled a hot rage. These had been innocent lives, slaughtered by Voldemort in the making of Horcruxes. Their bodies had been denied rest and turned into inferi to guard his creations. Ciaran felt that anger burn hot in him as well. Dumbledore, meanwhile, had stopped and extended a hand, feeling the air as if searching for something invisible. The others exchanged puzzled looks. There was nothing different to see along the shoreline. He moved his hand slowly through the air, and then, after a few seconds, closed his fingers on nothing that anybody else could perceive. All right, he said quietly, pleased, holding his fist as if encasing something. With his other hand, he tapped the clenched fist with his wand. Splash! A thick, greenish copper chain shot up from the dark water toward Dumbledore's hand. It coiled into his palm like a living thing and then slid out over the stones, clinking and rattling as it piled in a tangled heap. The chain dragged something else with it. Everyone watched as the prow of a small boat rose from the lake like a ghost, its timbers glowing faintly the same emerald as the chain, and it drifted onto the shore with barely a ripple. A boat, Professor McGonagall said, surprised. Tonks peered closer. What's it for? To go to the island in the center of the lake, surely, Dumbledore said. The boat bumped the shore with a soft thud. But our aim is not that island. It is the countless innocent souls sunk in this water. He let the copper chain fall from his hand and shook his head. To judge who may pass by measuring the amount of wizarding power? Tom is still using the same old tricks. One must admit, though, the device has a certain utility. Mr. Weasley looked at the boat, then at the dark water, and asked, How do we retrieve the remains of those poor people? You know who must have put some terrible enchantments on them to bar anyone from coming here. What if we all cast Incendio together? Tonks suggested, eager. Sirius's one fire didn't do much, but if all of us cast... Ciaran smiled faintly. Or we could use Fiendfire. It's far more effective than Incendio. He had used the Fiendfire curse before, to destroy Marvolo Gaunt's ring in the ruined Gaunt house at Little Hangleton, a vicious, powerful dark charm. The others turned to look at him, expressions shifting into something between curiosity and unease. 108. Inferi, Ciaran, you even know the Fiendfire curse? Professor McGonagall asked, surprised. That's a vicious dark curse. It can burn pretty much anything to ash. Ciaran gave an awkward little laugh. Fiendfire doesn't torture people, he said, but its destructive power is extreme. Sometimes, you have to use what's necessary. He had used it once, months ago, to destroy one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Dumbledore spoke softly from the lake's edge. The fire-making charm won't evaporate this lake quickly enough, and fiend fire is far too brutal here. It would burn the Inferi in the water, which we must avoid. Then what do we do? Sirius demanded. Ciaran considered. Maybe we can lure them ashore, then subdue and remove them from the water, and finally bury them properly. Lure them ashore? Mrs. Weasley asked. Will they come? Ciaran smiled, half grim. Voldemort created these Inferi to guard his Horcrux. Make enough noise, and they'll come. Then we bind them. They don't feel pain, and they're incredibly strong. Ropes probably won't hold them, Lupin warned. They'll still be useful, Ciaran replied. But Inferi are made by dark magic. Is there any charm to release them, to let them rest in peace? Moody stood staring into the dark water, his magical eye rolling over the tangle of pale bodies beneath the surface. I know a way, he said, but it won't work here. Dumbledore, thoughtful, added softly, I know a charm worth trying. All right, Ciaran nodded and drew his wand. He stepped back and told the others to stand clear. I'll start luring them. What would provoke Inferi? They were unnatural things, repelled by bright, pure magic. The answer came to him, the Patronus. Expecto Patronum. Ciaran sent the charm out. A milky white light streamed from his wand and condensed into the shape of an animal about half a man's height. Though ghostly, it was unmistakably black and white and round of face, a giant panda. Ciaran's Patronus is a giant panda? Dumbledore laughed despite the tension. The creature was impossibly charming. Mrs. Weasley smiled, softening. What a lovely animal. I hear they're China's national treasure. They have some at the London Zoo, though I haven't been to see them. The panda Patronus blinked its dark ringed eyes at Ciaran, looking confused. He frowned and pointed it toward the lake. The Patronus gave him a reproachful look, then bolted across the air on all fours, trailing a stream of milk-white light. At the same moment, something changed beneath the water. A pale, slimy hand broke the surface. Then another, then 100 more, as if the lake itself were a door to the world of the dead. The Inferi, men, women, children, old people, rose, floating with sunken, sightless eyes. They surged toward the rocky shore, drawn to the Patronus like hounds to a scent. Ciaran retreated. Heads and hands kept breaking the waterline, pale faces twisted with a single feral intent. The Patronus darted and circled, then fled back toward the shore, and the Inferi followed, pouring out of the lake in a torrent, an army of the damned charging up the stones. Fall back! Wait until most of them are ashore before you act, Moody shouted, leaning on his staff, wand ready. The Patronus glided to Ciaran's side and dissolved. Wands rose. Incarcerus! Someone cried. Petrificus totalis! Another voice rang out. Colored spells arced through the dim air. Thick cords burst from wand tips and snaked toward the nearest Inferi, while Petrificus totalis struck them, turning limbs rigid. Bound and paralyzed, the first ranks collapsed in heaps. But the tide of Inferi was relentless. They clawed at slick rocks, waterlogged clothes trailing, empty eyes fixed on the living. Dumbledore's voice rose over the others as he cast with calm precision. His nonverbal magic cut through the din. His wand never stuttered. Petrificus totalis incarcerus! Ciaran repeated, firing spell after spell. In minutes he had bound more than a dozen. The others matched him. Even creatures' old hands performed potent house elf magic and added to the pile. Dumbledore and Moody, as the Order's senior figures, had the most effect. They froze and roped dozens, 30, 40, but the rear ranks kept coming. Moody counted aloud between spells. Almost there, not many left, maybe 100 more. He kept his wand moving. Petrificus totalis, incarcerus. None of them used killing curses. To the Inferi, Petrificus totalis was not a cruelty. They were already dead. Soon the shore was a dense sprawl of paralyzed, roped bodies. Regulus, Sirius bellowed all at once. He had bound the last Inferius in front of him and threw himself forward without a thought. Creature screamed, Master Regulus! Petrificus totalis incarcerus! Moody locked the final Inferius rigid, and with a heavy thud it fell. Ciaran helped finish off the few that remained. At last, all the Inferi on the shore lay motionless, bound and frozen. Sirius collapsed over the figure of Regulus, tears spilling down his face. Creature keened and sobbed, betrayed, shrill and raw. Ciaran stood back and let the others grieve, exhaling softly as the storm of bodies and magic settled into a terrible, quiet heap. 109. The dead sleep forever. Regulus, we're home. I'm bringing you home. Sirius's voice cracked with suppressed grief, a sob threatening to break free. The emotions he'd been holding since learning the truth about his brother finally overflowed. He hoisted Regulus's body onto his back. The young man looked so like Sirius, no older than 20, frozen forever at that moment. "Oh, Master Regulus," Creature sobbed, a thin, keening sound that hung in the air. Silence fell over the others. The weight of sorrow grew heavier when they looked around and saw the many inferi that had been piled in the cavern, perhaps 300 or 400 of them. How many had Lord Voldemort slaughtered here over the years? "Let's get out first," Dumbledore said quietly, waving his wand. Dozens of inferi floated up and drifted out through the entrance. The remains of those victims had to be given proper burial. Otherwise, they risked remaining forever warped by the dark arts, bound to serve their murderer. "Albus, let's cremate them and bury the ashes on the cliff nearby," Professor McGonagall said sadly. "They should be locals." Ciaran raised his wand as well. Once the others had left, the remaining inferi drifted out through the same entrance. They reached the outermost cavern. After some of the cave had been destroyed, apparition was possible there. They each took several inferi and apparated to the top of the cliff. The sea breeze was bitter, November air, and the sun had already set. "Incendio!" Dumbledore pointed his wand, and the inferi burst into flames. The fire leapt into the sky, cutting through the dark of the coastline. Ciaran and the others dug a huge pit nearby to receive the ashes of the innocent who had been sacrificed. Sirius. Remus Lupin watched as Sirius laid Regulus down and stared at his brother's unmoving face, grief draining the color from him. Creature's eyes were red and puffy. The house elf's sobs were nearly broken. "I know, Remus. I want to look at Regulus again. I misjudged him back then," Sirius said, voice raw. "Sirius, I think, if Regulus were here, he wouldn't want to see you like this. He was brave. He fought you-know-who. He wasn't a Death Eater," Lupin said gently. Sirius pushed himself to his feet, wiping his cheeks, and pointed his wand at Regulus. "Incendio!" Flames swallowed Regulus's body. For a moment, Sirius's face was all agony, then it hardened into resolve. "Lord Voldemort, I swear I will fight you to the death. I'll make you understand what blood for blood means," he said through gritted teeth. "We will all fight you-know-who to the death," Lupin added. On the cliff, the inferi and the remains had been consumed. Wizards gathered the ashes, and even with the wind, none blew out to sea. With a flick of his wand, Dumbledore settled the ashes into the pit the others had dug. "May you rest in peace," Ciaran murmured, lifting earth with his wand until the pit was filled. It was not their home, but it was far better than the damp cave, and now they would no longer be bound to guard the objects that had been used to torment them. Moody rolled a great stone over and set it upright at the head of the burial. "Albus, put something on it," he said gruffly. Dumbledore traced runes with his wand. Limestone dust fell away as he carved the epitaph. When he finished, he read aloud, voice heavy, "Sacrificed for a peaceful and harmonious future, may they rest here for all eternity." Sirius produced a small bottle and carefully sealed Regulus's ashes inside. "I'll take Regulus home," he said. "He'll rest in the same graveyard as Mum and Dad." "Let's go," Ciaran sighed. With a series of soft cracks, they apparated back to number 12 Grimmauld Place, the Order's current headquarters. The old black family house was protected by the Fidelius charm and other wards, Muggle-repelling charms, and more. It wasn't as large as Hogwarts, but it was secure. The street outside was almost deserted in the cold, frosty night. They pushed open the door and filed in. "You're back. How did it go?" Kingsley Shacklebolt emerged from an inner room. Not everyone who had gone had returned. It was manageable, but Ciaran shook his head and trailed off. Kingsley caught sight of the small urn in Sirius's hands and knew at once what it contained. Sirius put Regulus's urn in his room. He would bury him properly later, and then join the rest in the meeting room. Creature crept back to his cupboard, finally spent. Having been rescued from that lightless inferi lake, he slept at once. "Sorry I'm late," Sirius said, forcing a smile as he entered. "It's all right, Sirius," Dumbledore replied. He picked up Slytherin's locket again, turning it over in his hands. "Have you thought of a way to destroy this Horcrux?" Moody asked. Dumbledore's face was grave. "There is a way, but it's not suitable to use here. This is Sirius's home." They could not, for instance, use fiendfire, the monstrous flame Ciaran had once raised, inside a living space. Very well, Dumbledore said, setting the locket aside for the moment. He faced the group. Voldemort has returned. His first objective will almost certainly be to secure his own resurrection. He can readily obtain the components for whatever ritual he favors, but he may not choose just any means or any person. Why? Severus Snape asked, frowning. To Voldemort, Harry is more significant than anyone else, even more than some of his own servants, Dumbledore said softly. Harry is the one who survived the killing curse, an event that led to Voldemort's downfall last time. So we must protect Harry, Mr. Weasley said. Make sure he never falls into Death Eater hands. Don't worry, Albus. We'll protect Harry, Lupin promised. Dumbledore hesitated, as if there was more he wished to say but did not. Ciaran's eyes flickered. He suspected what the headmaster held back. When Voldemort's killing curse rebounded 12 years ago, it had done more than destroy part of Voldemort's power. It had unintentionally made Harry into a Horcrux. If that were true, then as long as Harry lived, Voldemort could not be completely destroyed. Even if they found and destroyed every other Horcrux, and even Voldemort himself, the Dark Lord could still return so long as a single Horcrux remained. There would be no final death for him until every piece of his soul was found and undone. 110. Meaning, although Lord Voldemort has returned, as long as he hasn't been fully resurrected, he shouldn't be able to gather Death Eaters on a large scale, Ciaran said. He knows the true nature of his followers. Without enough power to overwhelm everything, those Death Eaters might not be willing to follow him, or they might even think about taking over. Death Eaters, you say? They only followed Voldemort for power, to oppress Muggles and other wizards without restraint, Sirius sneered, glancing pointedly at Snape, who already looked considerably recovered. Snape's face remained cold and unreadable. He tossed Sirius a look of contempt, as if arguing with him was beneath notice. Sirius snorted. The others ignored the exchange. Everyone here knew it always escalated into bickering when the two of them met, and they preferred to let it pass. Kingsley frowned. Dumbledore, the situation at the Ministry is probably very unfavorable. You know Fudge's attitude. He's ordered the Daily Prophet to print all kinds of slanders about you. It's an attempt to undermine your prestige and reputation across the magical world. Foolish, Moody said coldly. Yes, foolish, but he's still the Minister for Magic, isn't he? Kingsley replied with a wry smile. And we have to obey his orders, at least outwardly. We can't show any sign of defiance. Mr. Weasley added, Fudge is furious with the Ministry right now. He's forbidden anyone from contacting Dumbledore, and he's starting to eye me. The department I work in isn't crucial, so he won't focus on me too closely, yet. Dumbledore looked somewhat weary. I'm very sorry, Arthur, he said. It's all right, Mr. Weasley replied quickly. I'm not complaining. Well, I am complaining about Fudge. The facts are plain to anyone, but he pretends not to see them, as if he's blind. Arthur, you absolutely cannot say such things at the Ministry. It could get you into serious trouble, Mrs. Weasley warned. I know, he said. I've been trying to be very careful at the Ministry to avoid drawing Fudge's attention. Ciaran said, We need people at the Ministry, especially if Voldemort truly returns. Kingsley, Arthur, Tonks, you all must at least appear to oppose Dumbledore to gain Fudge's trust. At the very least, you must not give him reason to suspect you or trip you up. Yes, Dumbledore agreed. We can't be absent from the Ministry at a time like this. Anyway, as long as they don't remove me from the Chocolate Frog cards, I don't care what they say about me, Dumbledore added lightly. Kingsley, Tonks, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley exchanged glances, then nodded. All right, they said. Dumbledore then pointed to another danger. The creatures of the darker corners of the world may have heard that Voldemort could return, and they are stirring. He'll offer them promises we can't match, freedom for goblins, unrestrained attacks for werewolves. Mundungus, Rubus, Remus, you may face difficult times ahead. We'll keep a close watch, said Mundungus, Hagrid, and Lupin. One was a petty crook, another a half-giant, and the third a werewolf, each well-placed to keep lines of communication open with unsavory elements. If anyone meets others who share our ideals, bring them into the Order. They'll be welcomed wholeheartedly. The Order is one big family, Dumbledore said. He looked to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Arthur, Molly, Bill and Charlie are both abroad. Please write to them and ask them to monitor the situation among wizards overseas. If they can find like-minded allies, that would be invaluable. We'll spell everything out in our letters, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley agreed. That's about all the information for now. If anything changes, we'll communicate quickly, Dumbledore said. They discussed a few more contingency measures. Then the meeting adjourned, and everyone began to leave. Dumbledore took Slytherin's locket with him. Ciaran had not suggested using the Fiendfire curse to destroy it. Hogwarts possessed basilisk fangs, a powerful and reliable means to destroy Horcruxes. Remus, if you like, you can come here often, even stay. There are plenty of spare rooms, Sirius said before departing. Lupin chuckled. I'll take you up on that. Hogwarts isn't only offices, after all. There are bedrooms and washrooms, too. One by one, Kingsley, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, and the others apparated away with a crack. Dumbledore first escorted Mrs. Figg back to her residence, Privet Drive, the Dursleys' neighborhood, and then returned to the front of number 12, Grimmauld Place. Only a few Hogwarts staff remained, lingering. With another sharp crack, they apparated into Hogsmeade, and Sirius shut the door on the Black House. Hogsmeade was dim. The stars and moon were hidden behind heavy clouds. Thunder growled. Then lightning split the sky and the rain came down in sheets. Let's hurry back to school. It'll be unpleasant if it starts pouring, Ciaran said. No sooner had he spoken than a thunderclap echoed and the rain began. Ciaran, you really have a knack for jinxing things, Professor McGonagall complained with a smile. Ciaran gave an embarrassed laugh. Dumbledore conjured a handful of umbrellas and handed them to Ciaran, McGonagall, Snape, Lupin, and Hagrid. I could do with a steaming cup of hot chocolate and a good butterbeer, he said. Professor, I have some of my own brew. Would you like some? Hagrid offered in his booming voice. They all exchanged a look and shuddered slightly at the memory of Hagrid's cooking. It was the sort of meal that might break a tooth, so they politely declined. The group opened their umbrellas and hurried back into Hogwarts, each returning to their offices. Before turning in for the night, Ciaran used his accumulated force points to raise his magic level. 111. Become stronger. Are you sure you want to upgrade your magic to level 5 intermediate? Upgrade. Ciaran focused on the magic column and felt the flow of magic in his body surge. The display on his system panel changed from level 5 elementary to level 5 intermediate. Phew, he exhaled, feeling revitalized. He had finally pushed his magic up another rank. A year ago, his magic had been only level 4 elementary. Now he was level 5 intermediate. Even at Hogwarts, a school with 1,000 years of history, only Dumbledore and the 4 heads of house consistently exceeded that level. It was fair to say very few could match him. Lupin, for example, was powerful, but a little behind, roughly on par with Ciaran's earlier level 5 elementary. Lupin had struggled just to get by, and given his condition, it was remarkable he'd kept his magic so high at all. Of the people he'd once tangled with at school, James Potter was dead. Peter Pettigrew had been a rat for over a decade and was imprisoned in Azkaban. Lupin had suffered a hard life and was worn thin by it. Sirius had spent 12 years in Azkaban. The only one now who clearly surpassed them was Severus Snape, the potions professor. He was level 6 or higher and a top potions master. In terms of strength and prestige, Snape had become the clear frontrunner. As for Lily Potter, no matter how strong Snape might be, she had chosen James, not him. I still have 10 force points left, Ciaran murmured, glancing at the system panel. Upgrading his magic to level 5, intermediate, had cost 70 force points, leaving him with only 10, insufficient for another magic level upgrade. He could either spend them on other skills or save them. He considered transfiguration, potions, or herbology, and decided to raise transfiguration, which was already level 4, advanced. But when he focused on that column, nothing happened. 10 force points weren't enough to push transfiguration from level 4 advanced to level 5, elementary. Stumped, he changed plans. In the end, he used the 10 points to raise potions and herbology to level 4, intermediate, and bumped his flying from level 3 to level 4, intermediate. The system panel shifted noticeably. Name, 27. Magic, level 5. Force points figuration, level 4 advanced. Potions, level 4. Charms, level 5, elementary. Herbology, level 4. Flying, level 4. A grin spread across Ciaran's face. Power always brought a thrill. He found himself coveting the treasures housed in the headmaster's office even more. The Elder Wand, Harry's invisibility cloak, and the sorting hat. Elder Wand, invisibility cloak, sorting hat. If he could absorb the force points inside those 3 special items, becoming a level 6 top wizard wouldn't be a fantasy. The temptation was strong, but access was another matter. The wand and cloak were inanimate, so siphoning force points from them would damage them subtly, and the owners might not even notice, perhaps thinking it an illusion. The sorting hat, however, was different. It had a measure of sentience. Stripping it of that would essentially turn it into a mere hat and create a scandal Hogwarts could never patch up. The hat was a symbol of the school. Ciaran's thoughts turned to the Tri-Wizard tournament in the original timeline, when the Goblet of Fire had been used to choose champions. That goblet must contain a tremendous amount of force points, probably more even than the sorting hat, given the scale and publicity of the tournament. If the Tri-Wizard went ahead this year as planned, the goblet would be a prime target. He hoped the tournament would not be cancelled because of the uproar over Voldemort's supposed return. The Department of International Magical Cooperation and the Department of Magical Games and Sports had worked tirelessly for a year on the re-hosting. Cornelius Fudge had every reason to press on. In Fudge's mind, showing that the magical community was safe and prosperous was more important than acknowledging Dumbledore's warnings. He would prefer a grand tournament to appear in control, rather than concede to Dumbledore's claims. To Fudge, Dumbledore had, paradoxically, come to look more dangerous than Voldemort. Ciaran's spirits rose. The plot had shifted around him, though stronger now, he wasn't yet in the top tier. He certainly couldn't take on Voldemort or the most formidable Death Eaters. All the more reason to get stronger. There was no such thing as too strong. After that First Order meeting, the Order of the Phoenix didn't meet again for a while. There was no actionable intelligence, and they all had to be careful not to attract the Ministry's suspicion. Ciaran and the others who were confined to Hogwarts fared relatively well for the moment. Kingsley, Tonks, Arthur Weasley, and other Ministry employees who were also Order members were exhausted. Fudge had become distrustful of many within the Ministry, suspecting secret ties to Dumbledore. The Daily Prophet relentlessly smeared Dumbledore. Dumbledore's position as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot had been stripped, and there was talk, still unresolved, of reclaiming his Order of Merlin. In mid-November, Sirius sent a letter inviting Ciaran to Regulus Black's funeral. The ceremony would be held at the Black family house and would be very simple. The ashes had already been buried in the Black Lake, but Sirius didn't want Regulus to be forgotten after more than a decade in the water. He'd spent a long time debating what to do for his brother, and finally decided on a small farewell. Ciaran wrote back and agreed. The funeral was set for the day before Christmas, and Sirius took the opportunity to invite everyone to spend the holiday together. Regulus's funeral and Christmas were both at the end of December. It was only mid-November now, barely over a month away. Ciaran, meanwhile, had borrowed more precious books from Dumbledore, hoping to improve his charms through his own study. Here, Ciaran, the 3 books you need. Dumbledore pushed 3 bulky volumes across his desk: Secrets of the Darkest Art, Theory of Transfiguration, and a dreadfully long-titled work, a study of the practical and abstract results of natural death, especially the reunification of spirit and matter. These are very rare, Ciaran. Take good care of them. Dumbledore looked reluctant to part with them. He himself reread them often, especially the 3rd. Ciaran smiled. I never damage books. He took them into his arms. Oh, and your resurrection stone. As Ciaran turned to leave, Dumbledore reached into a drawer and produced a small stone, the resurrection stone, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. A few days earlier, Ciaran had gone home to fetch it and had handed it to Dumbledore, knowing roughly what it would be used for. Now Dumbledore returned it. His expression carried a trace of sorrow. His pale blue eyes were heavy. Ciaran took the stone quietly. My condolences, he said. When one gets old, one does things one knows are pointless, Dumbledore murmured with a bitter half-smile. The spirits called by the resurrection stone do not belong in the world of the living. they suffer here. In the tale of the Hallows, the brother who used the stone was so distraught by the pain of the returned that he took his own life and allowed death to claim him. With Voldemort lurking, Dumbledore could not afford that. The younger generation was not ready, especially Harry Potter, in whom Dumbledore had placed so much hope, and without him, the older wizards would struggle to stand against Voldemort. Even Alastor Moody, the Order's second-in-command, was no match for that kind of threat. He could not die yet. He had to hold up the sky. Dumbledore watched Ciaran walk away, his gaze thoughtful. Ciaran knew more than most. How he had learned so much, Dumbledore did not know. But one thing seemed clear. Ciaran stood with the White Wizards. His manner and mind showed no sign of slipping into the dark arts, even though some of the books he'd borrowed dealt with darker knowledge. That was enough. If Ciaran could grow quickly into a formidable power, another legendary White Wizard to challenge Voldemort, Dumbledore would die with no regrets. Harry had a special bond with Voldemort and a strong foundation, but he was too young to be trusted with everything yet. It might take years for him to mature. Dumbledore feared he might not have that time. "I hope Ciaran grows stronger," Dumbledore whispered to himself. "If he reached the level of Minerva or Severus, my burden would be eased." He did not realistically expect Ciaran to become legendary overnight, a level 7 on Ciaran's system panel, but the possibility of another White Wizard rising to contest Voldemort was a comfort. The heads of house, McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, and Sprout, were exceptionally talented, even surpassing Dumbledore in some respects, yet none of them were what the panel called legendary. Even Moody was not. Dumbledore's hopes for Ciaran were measured but sincere. Ciaran, for his part, would never have known or cared about those hopes. He had his own plans, and a system panel that could absorb force points from enchanted items to strengthen himself. As Ciaran headed down the stone staircase, an angry voice drifted from the corridor. "Snape's such a jerk. How could he insult Professor Lupin like that? Say he can't teach? Call hiring him one of Dumbledore's rare mistakes?" Ciaran recognized the voice. The next two were familiar as well. It was the time of month when Lupin would become a werewolf. Although Snape had prepared Wolfsbane potion to temper Lupin's savagery, it could not stop the transformation, and Snape was covering Defense Against the Dark Arts in Lupin's stead. "I think appointing him as potions teacher was the crazy move," another voice ground out. "Ron, this isn't the common room. Lower your voice before the teachers hear you," a female voice scolded. They rounded the corner as Ciaran descended and froze at the sight of him. It was Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Their expressions were awkward. Their complaint about a professor had been overheard. Even though they'd been criticizing Snape, they felt it was improper to do so in the open. Ciaran smiled lightly. "Speaking ill of a professor behind his back is not the behavior of good students," he said. He knew Snape, what he'd been through after Lily's death, why Dumbledore had trusted him, and he'd been a Hogwarts professor for over a decade. In the true timeline, Snape held many of Dumbledore's secrets and pushed the trio forward when the time came. "We won't again," Harry and Ron said at once, then thought to themselves, "We won't let you hear it again." Hermione's eyes drifted to the books in Ciaran's arms. Her curiosity was immediate. "Professor, what are those books?" she asked. "Could I look at them when you're done?" Ciaran glanced down at the titles. Secrets of the Darkest Art, and a study of the practical and abstract results of natural death, especially the reunification of spirit and matter, were hardly appropriate for students. They could twist a young mind toward dangerous interests. "We'll talk about that when you're older. For now, focus on what your teachers are teaching you." He pressed his palm once against the embossed cover, turned, and continued to his office on the 4th floor. Hermione pouted on the stair, clearly annoyed, while the boys shuffled after him, chastened. 113, Dumbledore's Secret Society. "What's wrong with looking at the names? Professor Frémont is being too stingy, humph." Hermione snapped angrily. Harry and Ron exchanged looks, deciding not to provoke her. When Hermione got going, she never stopped, and besides, they often needed her help with their homework. The two of them muttered a few more complaints about Snape under their breath before changing the subject. "You said Sirius is holding a funeral for Regulus. Who is Regulus?" Ron asked. Regulus is Sirius's younger brother. He died for reasons nobody fully understood more than 10 years ago. Now that Sirius has found Regulus's remains, he wants to give him a proper burial. Harry had received a letter from Sirius about it. Oh, Ron thought for a moment. Are you going, Harry? It'll be the holidays. If you go, I'll come too. He hesitated, then added, Sirius sent a letter to the Weasleys as well. Mum wrote to Percy yesterday to ask what we think. If we don't want to go to the funeral, we should stay at Hogwarts for Christmas and New Year. There won't be anyone at home. I'm definitely going, Harry said firmly. I want to ask, well, I have to go back to the Dursleys every summer, and I want to see if I can stay at Sirius's this time. He's my godfather, my relative, and he's my guardian. Of course you can ask. If Sirius agrees, you won't have to go back to the Dursleys, Hermione said. Ron gave a little chuckle. I didn't expect you'd be so reasonable, Hermione, he teased. Hermione glared, and Ron immediately shut up. Honestly, she went on, your aunt and uncle treat you far too poorly. It's all right. Harry smiled at Ron's stunned look. They raised me, after all. The food wasn't great, but I never went hungry, and I used to get a bit of pocket money. He paused, then added with a small grin, Of course, if you're saying I like the Dursleys, that's definitely not true. You scared me half to death, brother. Ron jabbed Harry in the chest, and Harry pretended to be wounded. All right then, I'll go too, Hermione announced suddenly. You? Ron blinked. Did you get an invitation from Sirius? Hermione smiled. Of course. I'll bring Crookshanks. So you're just coming because of Crookshanks, Ron said, understanding. Whose fault is it that your Scabbers turned out to be a murderer? Ron brightened. Sirius said he'd get me another pet, but why hasn't he mentioned it since? Maybe he's forgotten. I'll have to go ask him. Harry, Fred and George Weasley came barreling in, out of breath. Wood's been frantic looking for you. He said he'll give you a right old beating the moment he sees you, Fred gasped. Oh, right, the first Quidditch match is coming up. Wood says we need to step up training. Harry remembered and nodded. Hurry up, we'll wait for you at the pitch. They hurried back to the Gryffindor common room. I'll grab my broom and be right there, Harry said, and the trio jogged off. Meanwhile, Ciaran remained in his office, buried in books. The 3 volumes he had borrowed from Dumbledore were packed with deep, arcane knowledge. Even with his own level of strength and learning, much of what they contained felt profound and mysterious. Over thousands of years, he mused, many talented people have appeared in the magical world, many without famous deeds that survived history. The more magic he learned and the more powerful spells he mastered, the stronger he would become. But raw power without breadth of knowledge would be like walking with a limp. Strength alone wouldn't be enough in a world full of astonishing spells. Studying the theory himself also offered a chance to raise various knowledge stats. He couldn't afford to waste time. For now, he was concentrating on charms and transfiguration. Potions and herbology held little interest for him, and his talent in them wasn't outstanding, so he relied more on force points. As for flying, best not to mention it. There were many Hogwarts subjects he hadn't touched and wasn't particularly inclined toward, like divination. If his progress in charms and transfiguration later stalled and required too many force points, he might shift focus to those other areas. For the moment, though, he pushed the thought aside and turned another page. By the time Christmas arrived, Sirius's name had been cleared and Peter Pettigrew had been sent to Azkaban. Though Dumbledore had publicly declared that you-know-who had returned and the Ministry of Magic was busily discrediting him, the month before the holidays had been relatively calm for the students. Most went home for Christmas as usual, only a few stayed behind. Harry, who often stayed at Hogwarts over the holidays, hadn't signed up to stay this year. Are you all going home? Hermione asked in the common room. The Weasleys, their bright red hair making them impossible to miss, were gathered around. Ginny nodded. Yes, we're all going. She leaned in and lowered her voice. Have you heard? Dumbledore's put together some kind of secret society, and their headquarters is at Sirius Black's old house. Where did you hear that, Ginny? Percy asked, frowning. It's a secret, Ginny said with a sly smile. I'm practically an adult. I'll just ask Mum and Dad straight out. Percy puffed his chest, the head boy badge gleaming on his robes. George waved a hand. Okay, Percy, we get it. Your head boy. You don't need to keep reminding us. Percy sniffed. Ginny continued. I actually overheard Hagrid mention it by accident. When I pressed him, he changed the subject, so he must have thought we were too young to know. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged wry smiles. He told us the same thing, Ron said. If he didn't want to tell us, why did he let it slip and make us curious? Ron slammed his book shut in frustration. He hadn't been able to read a single word. It was clearly Snape's potions homework, but his mind wasn't on it. 114. Hermione's decision. What do you think Dumbledore's secret organization is called? Who's in it? What do they actually do? Fred asked, curious. George guessed, I bet they're mostly opposing that great idiot Fudge. It'd be better if Fudge were overthrown. I'd be the first to applaud. George, Percy scowled. He was determined to make a career at the ministry and become a senior official, and Fudge happened to be the Minister for Magic, the top post. Ah, yes, Fudge is Percy's hero. Percy dreams of being Minister for Magic, George teased. Humph, I'm afraid you'll cause trouble for Dad, Percy sniffed. Ron glanced around. Everyone was excited about the upcoming Christmas holidays, and no one nearby seemed to be listening. Keep your voices down, he muttered. This is Gryffindor Tower, not the Great Hall. Those Slytherin idiots might pass by. Still, they didn't go on about Fudge. Hermione argued sensibly. Overthrowing Fudge is impossible. If Dumbledore wanted to, he could just step forward and rally everyone. Why would he run a secret organization unless it was for something far more serious? I think they're fighting Lord Voldemort. The Weasley children gasped. Are you really that afraid of a name? Hermione said, annoyed, though the others pretended not to hear. Fighting you-know-who? That makes sense. Percy thought for a moment. I remember Mum said that when you-know-who was at his strongest over 10 years ago, she and Dad joined a group Dumbledore organized. It included people we know, Professor Lupin, Hagrid, Professor McGonagall, Sirius, then the Potters, the Longbottoms, and others. My parents were in it too? Harry asked. Probably, Percy said, uncertain. I'm not sure. I've never been in one of those secret groups. Fred brightened. Perfect. Let's see if we can join Dumbledore's secret organization. Isn't the old Black House the headquarters? I'll apply, George said, punching the air. A secret organization fighting you-know-who. Sounds exciting. Who do you think the members are? Ron asked. Ginny answered. Dad and Mum are definitely in it, and Professor Lupin, Professor McGonagall, Hagrid, Sirius for sure. Is Professor Frémont in it? We'll find out once we get to the old Black House and watch carefully, Harry said. They chatted for a while longer, then went to bed. They had to catch the train early the next day. The journey from the Hogwarts platform to platform 9 3/4 in London took time, at least a full day on the train. The next morning, they boarded the Hogwarts Express and found 2 empty compartments at the back. A small number of students were staying at school, so the train wasn't as crowded as usual. In the evening, the Express pulled into platform 9 3/4. They'd brought only a few changes of clothes and a couple of books. Mostly Hermione and Percy carried books, so their luggage was light. Their owls were still in the Hogwarts owlery, so they left the station easily and saw Mr. and Mrs. Weasley waiting. Harry, Hermione, Ginny, Mrs. Weasley hugged the 3 of them warmly. Didn't you see your other sons, Mum? George asked in a mock-offended voice. Oh, my heart! Fred clutched his chest theatrically. All right, stop mucking about. Mrs. Weasley shot them a look, and the twins quieted immediately. Harry always thought Mrs. Weasley had the presence of a lioness, firm enough to keep her mischievous sons in order. We'll take your father's car, Mrs. Weasley said, then turned to Hermione. Dear, have you explained it all to your parents? Hermione nodded. I wrote to them. Mum and Dad agreed I wouldn't go home for Christmas. They thought it polite that I attend the funeral of a friend's elder, especially since I'd been invited. They only asked me to send home more things from Hogsmeade, those bits of food and trinkets. They find them very interesting. Oh, that's true. Hogsmeade. Sometimes I'd like a stroll there, Mrs. Weasley said, and they headed for the car. Mr. Weasley was the last to get in and took the driver's seat. Harry, Ron, Fred, George, and Percy squeezed into the back. Mrs. Weasley, Hermione, and Ginny sat up front. The car looked ordinary outside, but was magically expanded inside, easily holding all 9 of them without feeling cramped. Dad, did you modify another one? Ron asked. The previous car Mr. Weasley had modified was the one that had been wrecked by the Humping Willow. Mrs. Weasley's face darkened at the reminder. Mr. Weasley hurried to reassure her. No, this car belongs to the Ministry of Magic, but I tend to use it a lot. The boys in the back row laughed. They knew Mr. Weasley loved Muggle contraptions, and it was clear he'd enchanted the car himself, even if, given last year, he'd registered it in the Ministry's name. After all, he was still a department head, even if the office was tiny. All right, buckle up. Let's get to Grimmauld Place early. Creature must have things ready. Well, Molly did make a lot too. We can eat first. You lot must be starving, Mr. Weasley said as he set off. Creature? Hermione asked, puzzled. Oh, a house elf from the Black family. Those ancient pure-blood families often keep house elves, Mr. Weasley explained. Hermione's breathing quickened a little. She managed to keep her voice calm. House elves. I've read about them in books. They're treated like slaves, beaten and cursed, their lives regarded as nothing. The elves might think it's an honor, Mr. Weasley began, then hastily corrected himself. I don't approve of beating and cursing them. That's inhumane. Oh, what? Mrs. Weasley sounded startled, then oddly earnest. Well, Creature's greatest wish is to have his family's heads displayed in the Black House, like his parents and ancestors. Filthy, vile slavery, Hermione exclaimed, disgusted and suddenly resolute. She would not let such things stand. 1:15, 12 Grimmauld Place. Seeing Hermione's grave expression, Harry quickly changed the subject. Grimmauld Place. Where's that? Mr. and Mrs. Weasley exchanged a look. Oh, right. Forgot to show you, Mrs. Weasley said, fishing a slip of paper from her pocket and handing it to Hermione. Pass this around and memorize the address. What? Ron stared blankly. You ninny? Don't you know about the Fidelius charm? George leaned forward from the back seat and read aloud the words Hermione now held. The Order of the Phoenix headquarters can be found at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London. Harry's ears pricked. The Fidelius charm? What does Sirius need protecting from? He asked. Mr. Weasley answered gently. The Black House has become the Order's headquarters. Sirius is very pleased about that. So the house's location has been placed under the Fidelius charm to stop you-know-who and the Death Eaters from finding it. Dumbledore is the secret keeper. As long as Dumbledore doesn't reveal it, no one can get the address from him. All right, everyone, take a quick look and memorize it. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley urged them. The paper passed from Hermione and Ginny to the 5 boys in the back row. They all concentrated until the address was fixed in their heads. By the time the car pulled up, it was late December, deep winter, with dusk already settling and snow beginning to fall again. The wind bit through their coats. Everyone shivered. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were the first out. We'll be much warmer once we get inside, Mrs. Weasley promised. Number 12? Which one's number 12? Ginny peered down the street and frowned. There isn't a number 12 here. They all looked. There were numbers 10 and 11, and to the right, number 13. Number 12 was nowhere to be seen. Ron began to ask, Mum, where is? Try to remember what you just memorized, Mr. Weasley said calmly. Percy, Fred, George, Ron, Ginny, Harry, and Hermione concentrated, but still only saw numbers 11 and 13, where 12 should be. Then, between the grimy walls and dirty windows of numbers 11 and 13, something shimmered. A house seemed to materialize out of the muck. Dirty outer walls, old peeling paint, a battered black door with a snake-shaped silver knob. There was no keyhole and no letterbox. Fred whooped, "Wow!" and George grinned, "Cool!" "Quick, go inside," Mr. and Mrs. Weasley urged, shepherding the children forward. Harry climbed the scuffed stone steps, staring at the newly revealed doorway. Mr. Weasley tapped once with his wand. A loud metallic clank echoed like a chain, and the door slowly creaked inward. "Children, come in, quickly," Mr. Weasley whispered, "but be very careful not to touch anything." They stepped into a shadow-filled hallway that smelled of damp and dust with an odd, sweet undertone. It had the air of an abandoned house. Harry glanced back as the others filed in. Ron, Fred, George, Percy, and finally Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Mr. Weasley shut the door, and the house dropped into a heavy silence. A light glimmered somewhere inside, and then the old gas lamps along the walls of the hall sputtered to life, casting unstable, flickering beams across faded wallpaper and a long runner of worn carpet. Above them hung a cobweb-laced, tree-shaped chandelier that flickered weakly. Ancient, darkened portraits hung along the curving walls. Many of the fixtures, lamps, a candelabra on a wobbly table, were carved in the shapes of large venomous snakes, their grim forms looming in the dim light. A door at the far end of the corridor opened, and Sirius Black filled the doorway, smiling broadly. He looked healthier than Harry remembered. "Welcome, Harry, Hermione, Ginny, Ron, Percy, Fred, welcome," Sirius called, stepping forward. "Come in, dinner's almost ready." He wrapped Harry in a tight hug. "You're so like your father, but your eyes are more like your mother's." "Green eyes?" Harry grinned. It warmed him to have someone who looked at him like family. "Professor Lupin mentioned that." "Yes, Remus did," Sirius said with a smile, glancing at Hermione and the ginger cat in her arms. Crookshanks still recognized him and purred contentedly. "What a clever cat!" "Thank you," Hermione replied, smiling. Sirius stepped aside to let them pass deeper into the house. "And don't worry about my mother," he added with a wry tone that made Harry pause. "She's not about to come down the stairs." Harry, puzzled for a moment, blurted, "Sirius, your mother, she's alive?" He realized as soon as he'd spoken that he'd muddled his words. "Sorry, I didn't mean." "No, she's been gone for years," Sirius said quietly. "But there's no mourning here now. Enough of that. Come, get comfortable." People were already gathered inside. Many faces were familiar to Harry, Professor Lupin among them, and another older wizard Harry had seen before, Professor Frémont. There were also strangers, a broad, dark-skinned man who looked powerful, and a thin, shifty man who watched everyone nervously. "You can put your things down here," Sirius said, guiding them toward the kitchen. "You'll be staying here for the holidays. You'll go back to Hogwarts when term starts again." The kitchen was as gloomy as the hall, a cave-like room of rough stone lit mostly by a huge hearth fire at the far end. Smoke hung thick in the air, giving everything a battle-scarred look. Grotesque metal pots and pans dangled from the rafters. At one of the tables, Ciaran was deep in a game of wizard's chess with Lupin. Ron's eyes lit up, and he hurried over to watch. Ciaran glanced at Ron and chuckled. "How about it, Ron? Want a game?" Then, with a casual flick, he knocked over the chess pieces Remus Lupin had been arranging. "Ciaran," Professor Lupin shook his head with an amused smile. He had the game well in hand and could have beaten Ciaran in under 10 moves. No one expected Ciaran to overturn the board like that. Ron looked tempted. "I heard you're really good at chess. Perfect chance to show Professor Lupin what you've got," Ciaran said, pushing the wizard's chessboard a little closer so Ron and Lupin could play. "Ron, a game?" Lupin asked, smiling. With nothing else to do, Ron returned the smile shyly. "All right, just one game," he said. Harry laughed from the side. "Professor Lupin, watch out. Ron's very good." "Is he?" Lupin raised an eyebrow. Harry's remark didn't put him off. If anything, it piqued his interest. He settled into the game with enthusiasm, while Ciaran leaned back and took a sip of beer, surveying the room. People clustered in twos and threes, talking and laughing. The place felt lively, definitely not the somber atmosphere of a funeral. Ciaran asked, "Is Dumbledore not coming?" At that, Harry and the others pricked up their ears. "Professor Dumbledore?" Sirius answered. "He won't be here today. He's expected tomorrow to give the eulogy for Regulus." They called it Regulus's memorial rather than a funeral. After all, Regulus had been dead for over 10 years, and his ashes had only recently been returned. Sirius, who had overcome the worst of his grief more than a month ago, was proud of his brother. A memorial, he felt, was something Regulus would have wanted to be a bit hopeful rather than mournful. "How did he?" Harry started, puzzled, then listened as Sirius sketched out Regulus's deeds. The story brought tears to several faces. Hermione and Ginny couldn't help weeping. Sirius waved them off with a laugh. "Don't worry, it's been over a month. I'm all right. Regulus gave himself for the cause against you-know-who. I'm proud of him." "Master Sirius, may we serve the meal now?" a high, eager voice called. Creature, the Black family house elf, had helped return Regulus's remains, and his relationship with Sirius had thawed somewhat. Hermione's tear-streaked face filled with pity. She leaned forward and asked, as if casually, "Sirius, who is he? What's his name? Does he get paid for his work?" "He's Creature," Sirius said, smiling. "Creature is the house elf of the House of Black. Paid? You'd frighten him to talk about pay." Creature, for his part, stared at Hermione with an expression of outright shock and fear, as if she were the last person he wanted to see. Hermione's breath grew heavier. Seeing the tension, Harry hurried in. "All right, Hermione, let's eat. I'm starving." Hermione looked at the spread being brought to the table. She was hungry, but her appetite hadn't quite returned. Under her breath, she muttered, "Slave labor." Sirius pretended not to hear. Ciaran, picking up a piece of steak, said, "Hermione, skipping a meal or two won't help the house elves situation. You'll just make yourself weaker." He had asked Creature to make a few spicier dishes. He liked his food hot. Hermione shot Ciaran an annoyed look. "You should get to know the house elves before you judge them," Ciaran went on. "Praise the ones you meet, learn what their needs are, and then think about how to help. Empty protests here won't change much." Hermione hesitated. Ciaran's point rang true, and hunger won out. She picked up her knife and fork and ate. The group around the table cleared their plates quickly. Desserts and several rounds of butterbeer followed. Laughter kept bubbling up around the table, though Hermione kept quieter than most. Once the plates were cleared, only a few of the adults remained, leisurely nursing their drinks. The younger wizards exchanged glances. Ron tried to ignore the looks Fred and George were giving him. Hermione and Ginny, comfortable with Tonks by now, were pestering her to try out different hair changes. Tonks obliged, showing off her talents as a metamorph magus. Fred and George stole looks at Harry and then at each other. "George, you go first," Fred whispered. Mrs. Weasley shot them an alert glare. "What are you two up to?" "Nothing," Fred said, putting on a guilty smile. Ciaran watched the twins with a half-amused expression. George, unable to meet his mother's eyes, blurted out a string of questions aimed at Ciaran. "Professor, what have you all been doing these past few days? Have you found you-know-who? Has he not killed anyone this time? What exactly is the Order of the Phoenix? Dumbledore's secret group to fight you-know-who? Can we join?" The room changed at the mention of you-know-who. A relaxed, sleepy warmth chilled into sudden alertness, subtle tense. Even Tonks stopped mid-transformation. The pig snout she had been about to turn into vanished, and her face returned to normal. Professor Lupin, who had been about to raise his glass, lowered it slowly, a wary look on his face. "So many questions," Ciaran muttered, rubbing his forehead as if to ease an ache. "Let me think where to start." The younger wizards leaned forward, eager. Mrs. Weasley sat up straighter from her half-reclined posture. "They're still too young," she protested. "They shouldn't be told things they don't need to know." "I think they can handle some of the less critical information," Ciaran said calmly. "They're learning magic, and you-know-who has returned. We need to begin planning and training the next generation now." Even the casual mention of that name sent a ripple of shivers through the room. 117. Dispute. It's only a name. We've decided to stand against Lord Voldemort. Why should we be afraid to say it? Ciaran asked. Several people pretended not to hear him. He went on. It wouldn't hurt to tell them less dangerous, basic information. If we leave them to guess, they could go astray in private, and that makes it easy for our enemies to exploit them. In the original timeline, Lord Voldemort used Harry to lure a group of young wizards into the Ministry of Magic's Department of Mysteries. Death Eaters and Voldemort himself showed up, and the resulting battle with the Order of the Phoenix ended in Sirius's death. For that reason, Ciaran argued, we shouldn't withhold from the younger wizards the essential knowledge they need just because we're afraid they'll get involved. Their enemies show no mercy. They are experts at manipulating young people. If information is useful, it should be considered. After all, Voldemort himself deceived countless people when he was young. But, Mrs. Weasley pursed her lips, they are too young. Children should focus on their studies and grow into useful wizards. They shouldn't be dragged into this adult war. Mom, I'm an adult. I'll graduate in one more semester, Percy muttered. Mrs. Weasley shot him a glare, and Percy shut up immediately. Lupin rubbed his forehead. Molly, listen to me. Mrs. Weasley looked up with hopeful anticipation, thinking she had found an ally. Lupin met her gaze and said quietly, I think Ciaran has a point. What's the harm in telling them some less critical things? Mrs. Weasley's face went scarlet. They're still children. I'm doing this for their own good. They just need to study hard. Dumbledore will protect Hogwarts. We adults can fight outside. Why involve the children? When they finish their studies and come out into the world, They'll have to face all kinds of dangers, Sirius said. We can't wait until then to let them learn about life and death matters. We have to prepare them now. Besides, they're not that young. Percy is technically an adult, and Fred and George are almost there. Percy, Fred, George, Harry, and Ron watched the adults like players watching a ball being passed back and forth in midfield. Hermione and Ginny, squeezed next to Tonks, had their mouths slightly open at the standoff. Tonks herself was fixed on Lupin. Ciaran took a sip of his beer and said softly, "Mrs. Weasley, I know you mean well, but given the situation, it doesn't hurt to let them understand more." "You haven't forgotten Dumbledore's warning, Ciaran?" Mrs. Weasley's voice sharpened, and a dangerous look slipped over her usually gentle face. "These children are like my own. Even Harry and Hermione, I treat them as my children. As responsible adults, we should be more careful for their sake, not make decisions based on what we want." Harry and Hermione were clearly moved and also impatient. They felt grown up, just not officially, still a few years away from true adulthood, and they longed for the knowledge that could help in the fight against Voldemort. They avoided Mrs. Weasley's gaze. "I will take responsibility for Harry. I'm his godfather," Sirius said coldly. "Thank you for the reminder, Molly." "Arthur, you should back me on this," Mrs. Weasley said, looking to her husband. Mr. Weasley took off his glasses and wiped them, looking tired. When he carefully put them back on, he said, "Molly, there's no harm in appropriately telling the children some things." "Yes, but that there's a difference between telling them appropriately and telling them indiscriminately," Mrs. Weasley snapped. "No one is proposing to tell them everything. They are still too young." Ciaran began. Mrs. Weasley's expression softened. She thought he had changed his mind. But Ciaran continued, "Still, the places where they don't understand are exactly where an enemy can exploit them. We should let them grasp the basics. More sensitive details, of course, must remain secret. Young wizards are easily lured. In their rebellious phase, they often act on their own ideas, which can run contrary to adults' wishes. To prevent the enemy from taking advantage of that and to keep them informed, Ciaran argued it was necessary to give them some basic understanding. "Harry is old enough to make his own decisions," Sirius said evenly. "He's not James, Sirius," Mrs. Weasley shot back icily. "You're not seeing him as James, are you? Harry is still underage." "I know. I won't expect him to be James," Sirius replied politely, though his face was unusually hard. "I sometimes think you don't believe that," Mrs. Weasley said, as if bracing for battle. "When you look at Harry, you see James. Because of your impulsiveness, your recklessness, you've already paid a heavy price, 12 years in Azkaban. You can't let Harry suffer for it." Sirius flushed, and who looked as if he might leap up. "I won't make the same mistake twice," he snapped. "Who knows?" Mrs. Weasley retorted. Sirius slammed his hand on the table, his body trembling. "Enough." Mad-Eye Moody finally spoke, tapping his walking stick on the floor as his magical eye swept the room. "Molly, you're not the only one who cares about these children. Sirius, sit down!" Mrs. Weasley's face shifted from pale to red, her lips trembling. Sirius sank back into his chair, ashen. Although the young should prioritize their studies, as Ciaran said, given what's at stake, it is necessary to let them know more and to raise their sense of urgency, Moody said in a deep voice. Ciaran's concerns aren't unfounded. If the young know nothing but are intensely curious, they can easily be exploited by the enemy. I've seen it happen. "All right, fine." Mrs. Weasley took a deep breath and then shouted, "Harry, stay here. Ginny, Hermione, Ron, Fred, George, Percy, out of the kitchen now. Immediately." A commotion broke out in the kitchen. "Mom, I'm an adult now. I'm about to graduate and go out into the world," Percy protested. "We're almost adults too. We can know these things." Fred and George called together. "If Harry's allowed to know, why can't we? We're the same age." Ron shouted, Hermione nodding vigorously beside him. "Mom, I want to listen too," Ginny added. "No," Mrs. Weasley snapped, shooting to her feet like an offended lion. Her eyes were huge and blazing. "I will never allow it. I absolutely forbid it." "Molly, you can't stop Percy now," Mr. Weasley said quietly, sounding tired. "He is legally an adult. It's not unreasonable for him to know." "He's still a student," Mrs. Weasley objected. "But legally, he is an adult," Mr. Weasley repeated. Mrs. Weasley's face flushed. She faltered, then gave in. "All right, fine. Percy can stay with Harry, But Fred, George, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, you go upstairs to bed at once. I've already made your beds. Mrs. Weasley, I'd like to stay and listen, Hermione blurted out. Then, meeting Mrs. Weasley's glare, she hurried to add, I'm still a Hogwarts student, aren't I? Professor Frémont is here. When my parents aren't around, Professor can act as my guardian. Professor Frémont, you'll agree to let me stay, won't you? She looked straight at Ciaran. Professor Lupin was present too, but Ciaran had been a professor longer and had earned their trust, especially since the events in the Chamber of Secrets when he had played an important and unexpectedly perceptive role. Mrs. Weasley's fussing was touching, but too much adult worry felt smothering. Hermione genuinely wanted to understand the Order of the Phoenix, what it was, what it did, and how it intended to fight Lord Voldemort. Ciaran took Mrs. Weasley's glare in good humor and smiled wryly. All right, Hermione, you can stay. Hermione beamed. Mrs. Weasley pursed her lips and relented with a sharp, Very well, Fred, George, Ron, Ginny, upstairs. The four boys made a noisy fuss all the way to the door. Their racket managed to rouse a new voice, a piercing scream from the portrait in the hall. Mrs. Black, Sirius's mother, had evidently been awakened, and her howls added to the commotion. Lupin and Sirius hurried to the portrait to quiet her down. When they returned and the kitchen door was closed, Sirius looked grim. You've met my mother, haven't you, Harry? Your mother? Harry said, startled. Yes, my dear old mum, Sirius said dryly. I've been trying to put her to rest for over a month now, but I think she's taken up permanent residency. She put an attachment charm on the canvas that can't be removed, so she just yells at strange hours. What is her portrait doing there? Harry asked, bewildered. Later, Moody cut in, interrupting the reunion of Godfather and Godson. We don't have much time. You need to get some rest. Percy, Harry, Hermione, 3 young wizards. What do you want to know? They exchanged glances, then Harry asked the question that had been burning in their minds for weeks. Where is Lord Voldemort? Has he really come back? And what is the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's secret organization? Ciaran answered softly, avoiding the tremor the name brought. Let's talk about the Order of the Phoenix first. Yes, it's the secret organization Dumbledore put together to oppose Lord Voldemort. He reformed it after Voldemort returned. Minister Fudge's fears are overblown, though he is right to suspect Dumbledore of having a secret group. If Dumbledore truly wanted to remove Fudge, he could likely do so without the Order. Dumbledore alone, by confronting the Ministry, might make Fudge resign. Sirius and Mundungus snorted, but stopped when they saw the others weren't laughing. As for where Voldemort is, Ciaran continued, we can't say for certain. It's unclear whether he has truly resurrected in the full sense. We do believe, however, that resurrection of a sort would require certain things, specific ritual elements. Things? Percy, Harry, and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. Hermione couldn't help asking the obvious question. What things? Does resurrection actually exist? Ritual requirements, Lupin said. Resurrection as people imagine it belongs to legend. So far as we know, examples come from ancient wizarding myths, no solid, reliable cases. Then why do you think Voldemort could come back? Sirius chuckled. Dumbledore believes such magic exists, doesn't he, Ciaran? All 3 looked to Ciaran. He nodded. Yes, that kind of magic can help a person return, but it has precise conditions. The most important is the state of the person attempting the ritual, being trapped on the boundary between life and death. Not fully alive, but not properly dead either. Otherwise, how could you talk about resurrecting someone who is either wholly living or truly dead? Hermione said. How could he be in that state? Percy asked, frowning. When you know who attacked Harry's parents 12 years ago, shouldn't he have died then? That's where Voldemort's dark arts come in. Ciaran said. He practiced an atrocity that few had even imagined, Horcrux magic. It is a terrible, cruel branch of the dark arts. Splitting the soul is inherently unstable. Ancient dark wizards might make 1 Horcrux at most. Voldemort made an unprecedented number. He paused, letting it sink in. He created 7 Horcruxes. It's almost beyond imagining. That, Ciaran suggested, is why Voldemort might be able to exist in that in-between state, and why his return, if it happened, would depend on ritual and on those dark objects. Only a few at the highest levels, Dumbledore among them, knew the full scale of it. Dumbledore was still trying to persuade Professor Slughorn and others to understand the truth. 119. Clear up doubts. Evil dark arts? What dark arts? Professor Frémont, is it more evil than Avada Kedavra and Crucio? Percy, Harry, and Hermione all asked at once. Ahem. Moody coughed loudly, the implication unmistakable. Ciaran smiled and shook his head. You don't need to know about that. There was indeed no need to burden young witches and wizards with knowledge of Horcruxes, too dangerous a temptation. The trio sighed in disappointment. Professor Frémont was about to explain, but Moody's interruption had cut him off. They dared not argue. Just looking at Moody made them uneasy. Why did Lord Voldemort stop killing? I read in History of Magic about modern times that he used to enjoy killing muggles, Hermione asked. Lupin chuckled. Hermione Granger, Hogwarts' top student, first in every subject. She'll be a prefect and head girl one day without a doubt. Hermione flushed and smiled shyly. Hermione, you're brilliant, Tonks said warmly. When I was at Hogwarts, I used to fail exams all the time. Potions was torture for me. It's a good thing Professor Snape isn't here, Ciaran said with a smile. Snivellus actually became the potions master at Hogwarts. I don't know what Dumbledore was thinking. Sirius snorted. Dumbledore has his reasons, Lupin said. And Severus is a gifted potions master. I don't think I've seen anyone better. Well, not even our old Professor Slughorn comes close. Sirius grunted and said no more. All right, back to the previous question. Why didn't Lord Voldemort go on a killing spree? Ciaran asked. That's easy. He didn't want to draw attention. For you-know-who right now, recovering and resurrecting are everything. Killing muggles or wizards for amusement can wait until he's fully back, Mr. Weasley said with a satisfied smile. Especially while he was plotting his return, Dumbledore caught wind of things. He had to be extremely careful not to leave a trail. How so? Harry asked, still puzzled. Because Barty Crouch Jr.'s identity, he the red-haired wizard disguised with Polyjuice, was exposed by Ciaran, Sirius explained. We rushed to the Crouch Manor and found evidence of Lord Voldemort. That's the last thing Voldemort wanted. He didn't want anyone to know about his return except a handful of the most loyal Death Eaters, but Dumbledore learned about it. Dumbledore is precisely the person he least wanted to alert, Lupin added. Percy and Hermione nodded as if that made sense, but Harry still looked confused. Does that help at all? He asked. Are you kidding? Mundungus scoffed. Everyone in the magical world knows Dumbledore is the only wizard you-know-who fears. So Dumbledore immediately reactivated the Order of the Phoenix and gathered us all, Mr. Weasley said. Hermione peered around at the gathered adults. Are you all members of the Order? She asked. A lot of those summoned to reactivate the Order were old members from over a decade ago, people like me, Moody, Arthur, Sirius, and Mundungus, Lupin chuckled. Tonks is a new member, Ciaran is a new member, and your Professor Snape is also part of the Order. What? Snape is a member of the Order of the Phoenix? Harry blurted, a look of dismay on his face. Percy and Hermione were surprised too. Sirius laughed outright. Harry, you should show some basic respect to your teacher. Call him Professor Snape, Ciaran said. Professor Snape will be invaluable. He's one of the finest potions masters alive. If he truly repents and is willing to fight Voldemort to the death, I think he's worth welcoming, Moody said quietly. How will you stop you-know-who from resurrecting? Percy pressed, eager for more secrets. As I said, it's about the ritual's requirements. If we understand what the ritual needs, we can interfere with it and prevent the resurrection, Lupin explained. And Dumbledore is wise. His plans are usually well ahead. What about his servants? Hermione asked. The Death Eaters, his allies, giants, werewolves, goblins? Reading again, Sirius said with a smile. Hermione nodded. Servants? Moody leaned on his cane. Yes, Death Eaters are Voldemort's followers, but being a servant doesn't mean they're truly loyal. When Voldemort fell 12 years ago, many Death Eaters insisted they'd been under the Imperious Curse. They betrayed others to save themselves and avoid Azkaban. Voldemort knows that. He wouldn't be pleased learning how many turned on him. Ciaran added, Voldemort hates Dumbledore and us, but he won't fully trust those Death Eaters either. Many followed him because of his power. Until he has a proper body and his full strength back, powers once rivaling Dumbledore's, he won't call a full gathering of his followers. That's different from us. We're gathered for the same purpose, not just because of Dumbledore, Moody said. Even if, hypothetically, something happened to Dumbledore, we'd still carry on. In the original timeline, after Dumbledore's death, the Order suffered greatly under Voldemort and the Death Eaters, yet the Order didn't collapse. It grew, with more members joining. That persistence speaks for itself. At that time, Voldemort was at his height. Even the Ministry had fallen. As for those dark allies you mentioned, Ciaran said quietly, before Voldemort truly returns, they won't side with him. But if he really resurrects and sends his Death Eaters to recruit them, it's hard to say they won't be swayed. Why is that? Don't they know how cruel and bloodthirsty Voldemort is? Harry asked, baffled. 120. Anger, Ciaran smiled. Harry, Lord Voldemort is cruel and bloodthirsty, but do you really think all dark creatures are innocent and kind? Before Harry could answer, Ciaran went on. No, the cruelty of dark creatures can be just as bad as Voldemort's and the Death Eaters. Otherwise, why would they be called dark creatures? They're cut from the same cloth, Harry, Mr. Weasley said. When you meet a dark wizard, you act immediately or run. When you meet dark creatures, you need to draw your wand and fight as well. Of course, if you can flee, escape at the first chance. Then why would they side with the dark wizard? Can't we win them over? Harry asked, still puzzled. Lupin gave a wry smile. That's almost impossible. Seeing Harry's confusion, he went on to explain. Dark creatures, werewolves. He paused, then continued. Vampires, dementors, and the like. You know who can promise them freedom across the magical world. Who suffers doesn't matter to him, as long as his power grows. And many dark creatures' desires outright conflict with ours, Lupin added. What do you mean? The werewolf leaders want to bite ordinary people or wizards to strengthen their kind. Do you think we'd agree to that? Do you think you know who wouldn't? We certainly can't accept such demands, but he will. He never cares about anyone else. Besides the Death Eaters, those dark creatures would form part of his army, Sirius said. In the past, he commanded a great many. Wizards and witches coerced or deluded into following him, his truly loyal Death Eater lieutenants. After all, a Dark Lord always has loyal subordinates, and many dark creatures of different species. Voldemort would never rely on himself and just a handful of Death Eaters to overthrow the magical world and attack the Ministry. So you're trying to stop him from gaining more followers, Percy said. We're doing our best, Lupin replied. How? Hermione asked. First, we have to confirm which dark creatures are hoping for Voldemort's return, because that way they can increase their own power, Ciaran said. We can be almost certain that werewolves, vampires, and dementors are in that category. Dementors? Harry shuddered. He still remembered fainting when one approached. Dementors feed on human happiness. There aren't enough people in Azkaban to satisfy them. They're always hungry. If Voldemort comes back and promises them freedom, they'll join him without hesitation, Ciaran said. So we identify how many people and creatures would side with you-know-who, and then we monitor them. That strategy has been incredibly useful. Why not? Hermione began, puzzled. If we've confirmed these dark creatures are devoted to Voldemort, why not lock them all up? None of them are innocent, and surely we could find the evidence. They all exchanged looks and gave wry smiles. Because of the Ministry's attitude, Hermione, Tonks said, shaking her head sadly. Look at Cornelius Fudge. When Dumbledore told him Voldemort had returned, he panicked, but he won't change his position. He absolutely refuses to believe any of it. The three younger wizards stared. Why? The facts are right there. Barty Crouch has vanished. How can he still hesitate? Does he really not see it? Hermione asked, incredulous. You're right, Hermione, Ciaran said. He didn't think well of Fudge either. Barty Crouch's disappearance can be explained away in other ways, but Fudge will never let Dumbledore run the Ministry, even if Dumbledore had no such intention. Dumbledore? The three looked even more confused. Ah, you've hit the crux of the matter, Mr. Weasley said with a crooked smile. Dumbledore. Fudge is afraid of Dumbledore. You should all know that, Tonks said sadly. Afraid of Dumbledore? The three young wizards blurted. Yes. Fudge is afraid that Dumbledore will replace him, Mr. Weasley said warily. Fudge thinks Dumbledore is plotting to overthrow him and take the Ministry. He believes the so-called return of you-know-who is just Dumbledore trickery. He refuses to give up the Ministry chair and sees Dumbledore as a scheming troublemaker. But Dumbledore isn't interested in becoming minister, Harry protested. Of course he isn't, Mr. Weasley said bitterly. He has never shown any desire for the post. If he wanted it, who would challenge him? But Fudge won't believe it. Many people once suggested Dumbledore for minister, and he always refused. He only wants to be a good headmaster. Fudge, though, remembers how beloved Dumbledore is. He knows he could never compete. Putting Fudge in charge was the worst thing that could have happened, Moody scoffed. Who could have known he would change like this? Lupin said with a rueful smile. At first, Fudge trusted Dumbledore, wrote to him, sought his counsel. But power is intoxicating. After Fudge tasted it, he couldn't let it go. He convinced himself he's the rightful minister and the most capable wizard, while Dumbledore is a dangerous rival. How could he think that? Is he mad? The three young wizards cried. Ciaran spread his hands. Because admitting Voldemort has returned means the Ministry must face a problem it hasn't handled in over a decade. Fudge came to power after Voldemort fell. He lacks the experience. Back then it was Barty Crouch, not Fudge, fighting dark wizards, and he doesn't have the ability. It's easier for him to smear Dumbledore than to deal with Voldemort.